Her name appears only once. One word written in faded ink on a fragile page from Salem Village, Massachusetts. The ink has turned the color of dried blood after more than 300 years. Tituba. No last name. No birthplace. No family. Just a single word marking the testimony of a woman who confessed to witchcraft in February of 1692. After that moment, she disappears completely. No trial record. No execution order. No burial site. No release papers. It is as if she never existed. But history is lying to you. Tituba did not simply start the Salem Witch Trials. Her confession contained details so disturbing that the magistrates ordered large sections removed from the official record. For centuries, historians claimed those pages were lost, burned, destroyed, forgotten. They were not lost. They were hidden. And what those erased words reveal is not just madness or superstition. They point to a calculated manipulation of fear, power, and guilt. A conspiracy protected by some of the most powerful families in early New England. Families who made sure Tituba vanished so the truth would never follow her. This is not the story you were taught in school. This is the story of what really happened in Salem. Before we continue, if you enjoy uncovering the darkest secrets buried in American history, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. These stories are not meant to be forgotten. What happened in Salem in 1692 was not an accident. It was the violent release of pressure that had been building for years inside a community already tearing itself apart. Salem Village in late 1691 looked peaceful from the outside. Neat wooden houses stood around a small common. Smoke rose from chimneys into the cold Massachusetts sky. Stone walls cut through frozen fields. Everything looked orderly, godly, safe. It was none of those things. Salem Village was only 15 years old as an independent parish. It existed in the shadow of Salem Town, its wealthier neighbor closer to the coast. Salem Town thrived on shipping, trade, and foreign goods. The village did not. The village was home to around 600 people, most of them farmers. The land was thin and rocky. Each year the soil grew worse. Crops failed more often. Winters felt longer. Hope grew weaker. Many families had arrived believing they were building a perfect religious community. Instead they found hunger, debt, and exhaustion. Fear came from the north. Since 1688, King William's War had devastated the frontier. French forces and their indigenous allies attacked settlements across Maine and New Hampshire. Entire towns were burned. Families were slaughtered in their sleep or taken captive. Refugees fled south into Massachusetts, bringing horror with them. They spoke of midnight attacks. Screams in the dark. Children dragged away into the forest. Several Salem Village families took these refugees into their homes. The fear became personal. The enemy was no longer distant. Evil could come at any time. From anywhere. This fear of invisible threats would soon consume the village. But the greatest danger was already inside. Salem Village was split into two bitter factions. On one side were the Western farmers, led by the powerful Putnam family. They were among the first settlers and believed Salem Village should remain independent and strictly religious. On the other side were Eastern landowners tied to Salem Town and its merchants. The Porter family stood at the center of this group. They believed trade and connection were necessary for survival. This conflict poisoned everything. Nothing showed the division more clearly than the village church. In just 15 years, Salem Village had gone through 3 ministers. Each one left in anger after fights over money, power, and authority. In 1689, the village hired Reverend Samuel Parris. It would be a fatal decision. Parris was 46 years old when he arrived. His life had been marked by failure. Born in London, he had connections but no success. He attended Harvard but never finished. He tried business in Barbados and failed completely. By the time he left the Caribbean, he was bankrupt. All he brought with him were his wife Elizabeth, his children, his niece Abigail Williams, and 2 enslaved people. A man named John, and a woman named Tituba. Rumors followed them north. Some whispered that Tituba had once been Parris's concubine. Others claimed she knew his secrets. There was no proof, but Parris trusted her more than was normal. She managed his household. She handled his belongings. She was present during private moments. People noticed. Paris did not become a minister because he felt called by God. He became one because he had nowhere else to go. The Puritan Church always needed educated men willing to serve in rural parishes. Paris's partial Harvard education was enough. From the beginning, his sermons were dark. He preached about enemies hiding among the faithful, about Satan's kingdom spreading through the wilderness, about neighbors who smiled in daylight but served the devil at night. Some villagers believed him completely. Others felt uneasy. The Putnams became his strongest supporters. The Porters became his loudest critics. They challenged his salary. They questioned his authority. They refused to give him full control of church land. By late 1691, Paris felt surrounded and terrified. It was during this time that Tituba slipped quietly into the background. She was likely around 30 years old. No one knew for sure. No one asked. Her skin marked her as different. People argued about her origin in whispers. African, indigenous, Caribbean, Spanish, Portuguese. The truth did not matter to them. She was simply other. She spoke English with a strange accent shaped by the Caribbean. She had knowledge of herbs and healing learned in Barbados. In Salem, that knowledge became dangerous. She worked endlessly, cooking, cleaning, spinning, caring for the children, surviving the cold, listening to sermons that spoke of invisible demons while knowing she would be the first blamed if fear needed a face. At night, she shared a freezing attic room with John. And soon, Salem would decide that the devil lived there with her. This was only the beginning. In the next part, strange illnesses will strike the children of the parsonage. Accusations will begin, and Tituba will be forced to speak words that would doom dozens and erase herself from history. Part 2 is where the terror truly begins. Part 2. The stories that should never have been told. Every disaster begins with a small secret. In Salem Village, that secret was whispered beside a dying fire, shared between two frightened girls and a woman who had nothing left to lose. And once it was spoken, it could never be taken back. Reverend Samuel Paris paid Tituba nothing. She was property, not a person. Yet he depended on her for everything. His wife Elizabeth was often ill, struck by long bouts of weakness that left her confined to bed for days. No doctor ever named her sickness. Without Tituba, the household would have fallen apart. Tituba cooked. She cleaned. She tended the children. She made candles and soap. She spun thread and mended clothes. She rose before dawn and worked long after dark. In the kitchen hearth, there was a stone cracked by years of heat and cold. Sometimes Tituba would stare at that crack when she thought no one was watching. Its shape looked like a bird in flight, wings wide and free. Those who noticed thought her simple-minded. They were wrong. She was remembering. What she remembered, the records do not say. But memory can be dangerous. Perhaps she remembered a home before chains. A language she was no longer allowed to speak. A life where she was more than a shadow moving through someone else's house. Or perhaps she was planning. Because Tituba, as Salem would soon learn, was not foolish. Another constant presence in the Paris household was Abigail Williams. She was 11 years old in the winter of 1691. An orphan. No one agreed on how her parents died. Some said an Indian raid. Others whispered of sickness. The truth vanished with them. Paris took Abigail in out of duty, not love. She slept in a small room near the kitchen. She worked alongside Tituba. Her education was minimal. Reading, scripture, obedience. Abigail was sharp. She watched everything. She saw her uncle's anger at the congregation. She heard the arguments about money. She noticed how power worked in Salem Village. Who was listened to? Who was ignored? She also understood her own danger. If Paris lost his position, Abigail would lose everything. An orphan girl with no dowry and no family had only one future. Servitude. Fear made her observant. Observant made her dangerous. Betty Paris was different. At 9 years old, she was fragile and nervous. Her father's sermons terrified her. He spoke of demons hunting children. Of hellfire waiting for the sinful. Betty believed him. At night she imagined shapes in the dark corners of her room. She feared her mother would die. She had already lost one baby sibling. Death felt close. Betty and Abigail were close but unequal. Betty was the minister's daughter. Abigail was the dependent. This imbalance mattered more than either girl understood at the time. Winter sealed them together. The winter of 1691 was brutal. Snow buried the village. Wood ran low. Paris's salary arrived late and often in firewood that barely lasted. The house was cold. The days were long. The nights endless. Isolation pressed in. Because of Paris's conflicts with the village, few families visited. The girls had nowhere to go. No friends. No distractions. It was Abigail who finally broke the silence. She asked Tituba for stories. At first, Tituba refused. She knew her place. Silence was safety. But one evening, when Paris was away and Elizabeth lay ill, she gave in. They sat by the fire as it faded to embers. Tituba began to speak. She told them of Barbados. Of heat so heavy it felt alive. Of flowers brighter than anything in Massachusetts. Of birds that could copy human voices so perfectly they could fool you. She spoke of sugar plantations stretching farther than the eye could see. Of songs sung in the fields to survive endless labor. Of the ocean, warm and blue-green, nothing like the cold gray sea of New England. The girls were transfixed. They begged for more. Night after night, Tituba told them stories when she could. She described a world filled with many peoples. Africans from distant kingdoms. Indigenous people from the mainland. Europeans from many nations living together. To the girls, it sounded like magic. Then they asked for something frightening. Tituba hesitated. She should have stopped. Instead, she told them about Obia. About people who read futures in eggs and water. About herbs that healed and herbs that killed. About forces the English ministers never named. For the first time, the girls leaned toward her as if she mattered. For a few hours, Tituba was not invisible. She was powerful. The feeling was intoxicating. And fatal. The sessions continued in secret. Tituba showed them how to crack an egg into water and read the shapes. How to listen to the wind in the chimney. How to identify herbs in the garden. Pennyroyal, tansy, foxglove. Knowledge passed from women to women for generations. In Salem, it was forbidden. When English women practiced healing, it was wisdom. When Tituba did, it was suspicion. She knew this. But she continued anyway. Because power, once tasted, is hard to surrender. The secret did not stay secret. Ann Putnam, 12 years old and daughter of the most powerful man in Salem Village, heard whispers from Abigail. Abigail liked being important. She liked having something others wanted. Anne listened closely, and Salem was about to learn what happens when fear finds a voice. In the next part, the children begin to scream. Bodies twist. Accusations are spoken aloud. And once the word witch is said, there is no turning back. Part 3 is where Salem loses its soul. Part 3. When the screams began, Salem did not fall apart all at once. It began with girls screaming. At first, it was only whispers. Nervous glances. Quiet prayers. Then the screams grew louder. More frequent. Impossible to ignore. And once fear found a voice, it spread like fire. Ann Putnam demanded to be included. She was 12 years old, the daughter of Thomas Putnam, one of the most powerful men in Salem Village. When she heard about the secret gatherings in the Paris kitchen, she did not ask politely. She insisted. She brought others with her. Elizabeth Hubbard, 17, who lived in the household of the village doctor. Mary Walcott, 16, from another respected family. Mercy Lewis, 19, a servant in the Putnam home, a girl whose parents had been killed in an Indian raid years earlier. By late January, the circle had grown to 8 or 9 girls, ranging in age from 9 to 19. They gathered in the Paris kitchen on cold afternoons. Officially, they were there for prayer and needlework. In truth, they were there to escape. To listen. To feel something other than silence and obedience. Tituba spoke of worlds that felt unreal to them. Warm places. Bright colors. People who lived without constant fear of sin. Knowledge passed quietly from woman to woman. They cracked eggs into glasses of water, laughing nervously as shapes formed. They tried to see their future husbands. They listened to stories of people who could see beyond the present moment. For girls raised to obey without question, it felt like freedom. They did not understand the danger. Reverend Samuel Paris noticed the change. His daughter Betty seemed restless. Abigail stopped talking when he entered the room. Whispered conversations ended abruptly. Laughter vanished the moment his footsteps sounded. At first, he suspected childish misbehavior. Singing, games, things he already believed opened the door to sin. So he watched. He listened at doors. He peered through cracks in the floorboards from the room above. What he heard chilled him. Tituba speaking of practices he believed came directly from the devil. His daughter and niece listening eagerly. Other girls involved. This was exactly what he preached about. Satan using innocent faces to build his kingdom. But Paris did not act immediately. He was careful, calculating. An accusation of witchcraft could backfire if it failed. And his position in Salem was already unstable. He needed certainty. Then the moment came. Late in January, Betty Paris began to have fits. At first, they seemed like nightmares. She woke screaming, sitting upright in bed, eyes wide and empty. She cried about flames, about dark shapes, about being pulled into fire. Her mother tried to comfort her, but Betty did not recognize her. She spoke in strange voices. Sometimes she went silent, frozen for minutes. The fits worsened quickly. Betty screamed during the day. Her body twisted in unnatural ways. She complained of invisible needles stabbing her skin. She clutched her chest, gasping as if something was sitting on her. Once, she tried to throw herself into the hearth. She had to be restrained. Paris believed God was punishing his household. He held hours-long prayer sessions. He begged for forgiveness. He searched his conscience for hidden sins. Nothing helped. The fits grew worse. Betty convulsed violently. She barked like a dog. She hissed like an animal. She tried to bite anyone who came near her. The village doctor, William Griggs, was summoned. He was an elderly man with limited medical training. He examined Betty carefully. No fever, no illness, no physical cause. After several visits, he spoke the words that changed everything. The evil hand is upon her. In 1692, this meant witchcraft. The diagnosis spread instantly. The minister's daughter was bewitched. If Satan could attack her, no one was safe. Within days, Abigail Williams began to suffer fits of her own. She screamed. She convulsed. She claimed to see ghostly figures tormenting her. She tried to climb the chimney, insisting she could fly. Her voice changed. She spoke words that did not sound like her own. The girls fed off each other. One screamed and the other followed. Then Ann Putnam fell ill. Then Elizabeth Hubbard. Then Mary Walcott. The affliction spread only among the girls who had gathered in the kitchen. They froze mid-sentence. They cried out as if stabbed. They saw dark shapes. Animals that spoke. Women flying through the night. Their symptoms followed the same pattern. Screaming fits. Sudden paralysis. Sensations of being bitten or pinched. Visions no one else could see. Strange voices. Dangerous behavior. Modern explanations would come centuries later. In Salem, there was only one answer. Witchcraft. The village panicked. Prayer meetings lasted for hours. Families wept together. Reverend Paris preached sermons about Satan's attack on the godly. The Putnams demanded action, but there was a problem. The girls would not name names. When asked who tormented them, they cried out in pain, claiming the witches were choking them into silence. The pressure grew. Families questioned them relentlessly. Paris interrogated Betty and Abigail for hours. The village leaders made it clear that Salem could not be saved until the witches were named. By late February, the girls were ready. On February 25, arrest warrants were issued for 3 women. Sarah Good, Sarah Osborne, and Tituba. This was not random. Sarah Good was poor, homeless, angry. She cursed those who refused her help. She smoked a pipe. She had a sick infant. She fit every fear the Puritans had. Sarah Osborne was sick and absent from church. She had lived with a man before marriage. She had fought the Putnams over land. Tituba was enslaved, foreign, dark-skinned, known to tell stories, known to teach forbidden knowledge. She had no protection. The Putnams knew her value. If Tituba confessed, everything would be confirmed. What they did not know was that Tituba had already decided how to survive. She had seen the net closing. And she was ready to speak. The examinations would begin on March 1. Salem gathered to watch. And Tituba would change everything. In the next part, she will open her mouth. And Salem will never recover. Part 4. The confession that opened the gates of hell. The moment Tituba opened her mouth, Salem crossed a line it could never return from. Up until that point, fear ruled the village. After that moment, fear became law. On March 1, 1692, the Salem Village meeting house overflowed with people. Men stood shoulder to shoulder. Women pressed forward, clutching their shawls. Children peeked between adults, sensing they were witnessing something forbidden. This was not a trial. It was a spectacle. At the front of the room sat the magistrates, Jonathan Corwin and John Hathorne. They were powerful men from Salem town, sent to investigate the growing crisis. Reverend Paris stood nearby, watching closely. 3 women were brought forward. Sarah Good, pregnant, ragged, furious. Sarah Osborne, sickly, carried in because she could barely walk. And Tituba, she stood out immediately, dark-skinned, foreign, silent, bound by rope. The afflicted girls were brought in as well. Betty Paris, Abigail Williams, Ann Putnam, Elizabeth Hubbard, Mary Walcott, Mercy Lewis. The moment Tituba entered, the girls began to scream. They fell to the floor. They twisted and cried out. They claimed invisible hands were choking them. Fingers pointed. She is here. She hurts us. The magistrates demanded silence. Then they turned to Tituba. Why do you hurt these children? Tituba said nothing. She looked at the floor. Hathorne leaned forward. Do you serve the devil? Still silence. The crowd murmured. Fear thickened the air. Then Tituba spoke. Yes. The room froze. No one had expected that word. Confessions were rare. Most accused witches denied everything. Tituba did not. Yes. I serve him. The girls screamed louder. The magistrates leaned closer. Who made you serve him? Tituba lifted her head. He came to me. She described a tall man dressed in black. He offered her fine things if she would serve him. He asked her to sign a book. The devil's book. This was everything the Puritans feared. What else did you see? Tituba hesitated. Then she began to speak in detail. She spoke of animals that walked upright. Of dogs and cats that spoke with human voices. Of birds that carried messages through the night. She described witches flying on sticks through the air. She said she saw Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne there with her. The crowd gasped. The girls convulsed violently, as if the words themselves were attacking them. Hathorne asked how many witches were in Salem. Tituba paused. Then she said the words that changed everything. There are many, too many to name. The room erupted. If Tituba had denied everything, the panic might have faded. But she did the opposite. She confirmed every nightmare Paris had preached about. Salem was not dealing with one witch. It was dealing with a conspiracy. Tituba spoke for hours. She told them the devil wanted to destroy the godly people of Salem. She said witches met in secret. She described a dark book filled with names. When asked whose names were in it, she said she could not read them all. The devil would not allow it. The magistrates were satisfied. This was proof. Sarah Good screamed her innocence. She cursed her accusers. She said Tituba was lying. Sarah Osborne denied everything as well, too weak to even raise her voice. But it no longer mattered. Tituba had given them what they wanted. A story that explained everything. She was taken away in chains. But something strange happened next. Tituba was not treated like the others. She was fed. She was questioned gently. She was encouraged to talk more. Confession meant survival. Denial meant death. Tituba understood this better than anyone. She had seen how power worked in the Paris household. She knew what the magistrates wanted. She gave it to them. And in doing so, she saved her life. Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne were sent to prison in chains. Sarah Osborne would die there before ever seeing a trial. Tituba lived, but her words unleashed something unstoppable. If witches were real, then anyone could be one. If the devil had a book, then any name could be in it. Within days, accusations spread. Neighbors accused neighbors. Children accused parents. Servants accused masters. Old grudges resurfaced. Land disputes. Inheritances, jealousies, all of it poured into the open under the cover of righteousness. The afflicted girls became untouchable. If they cried out during testimony, the court believed them. If they pointed, Someone was arrested. Spectral evidence was accepted. If a girl said she saw your ghost harming her, that was enough. The rules of reality collapsed. And Reverend Paris watched it all unfold. He had lost control. The panic no longer needed him. It fed itself. Meanwhile, Tituba sat in a dark cell, waiting. She had confessed. She had named others. She had survived. But she also knew something no one else did. The story she told was not the whole truth. Some details were her invention. Others were borrowed from Puritan fear. And some were memories twisted into something Salem could understand. The magistrates believed they were uncovering evil. In truth, they were creating it. In the next part, accusations will explode across Massachusetts. The prisons will fill, and the gallows will be built. Part 5 is where Salem begins to kill. And it will not stop easily. Part 5. When accusation became a weapon. Once the first confession was spoken, Salem could no longer stop. Fear had been given permission. And fear does not ask questions. It only points. After Tituba's confession, the village changed overnight. People stopped trusting their neighbors. Doors stayed locked. Prayers grew longer and more desperate. Children watched their parents with new suspicion. If the devil could hide in Salem, he could hide anywhere. The jails began to fill. Sarah Good was shackled and thrown into a filthy cell. Pregnant and starving, she slept on cold stone. Her baby would later be born in prison and die shortly after. Sarah Osborne, too weak to stand, was dragged from her bed and imprisoned. She would never leave alive. And still, the accusations spread. The afflicted girls were taken seriously in a way young females never had been before. Their screams controlled rooms full of adult men. Their convulsions stopped court proceedings. Their words carried the power of life and death. If a girl cried out and pointed, someone was arrested. No proof was needed. Spectral evidence was enough. If the girls claimed they saw a person's spirit harming them, that person was guilty. The court accepted this without question. Reason collapsed. Within days, more names were spoken. Martha Corey was accused. She was a respected church member, known for her intelligence. When the girls screamed at the sight of her, Salem panicked. If even the godly could be witches, no one was safe. Rebecca Nurse was next. She was 71 years old. Deeply religious. Widely respected. When she was accused, the village froze. Surely not Rebecca Nurse. But the girls screamed. They twisted and fell to the floor. The magistrates believed them. Rebecca was arrested. The message was clear. Reputation no longer mattered. Age did not protect you. Faith did not protect you. Only accusation mattered. The prisons in Salem Village and surrounding towns overflowed. Accused witches were chained in dark, freezing cells. Some were transported to Boston. Others were kept in overcrowded jails where disease spread quickly. Families were destroyed. Children watched their mothers taken away. Husbands stood powerless as wives were accused. Property was seized to pay jail fees. The system rewarded accusation. Those who confessed were spared execution, at least for the moment. Those who denied were marked as stubborn servants of Satan. Tituba's survival became an example. Confess and live. Deny and die. This knowledge spread quietly among the accused. Some began to confess falsely, naming others to save themselves. The web grew wider. Behind the scenes, powerful families benefited. The Putnams accused their enemies with alarming frequency. Old land disputes resurfaced. Inheritance conflicts found new solutions. Witchcraft became a convenient explanation for personal grudges. Reverend Paris preached harder than ever. His sermons described Salem as a battlefield between God and Satan. He warned that mercy toward witches was mercy toward the devil himself. The people listened. The Massachusetts authorities could not ignore the chaos. In May 1692, a special court was created. The Court of Oyer and Termine. Its purpose was to hear and decide cases of witchcraft quickly. Its arrival sealed Salem's fate. The judges were powerful men. They believed deeply in witchcraft. They accepted spectral evidence. They trusted the afflicted girls completely. The trials moved fast. Too fast. Bridget Bishop was the first to be tried. She was loud, independent, known for wearing colorful clothing. She had been accused before. The girls screamed at her in court. She denied everything. She was convicted. On June 10, 1692, Bridget Bishop was hanged. The first execution. Salem watched and learned. Death did not stop the accusations. It encouraged them. The gallows became a tool of purification. Rebecca Nurse was tried next. At first, the jury found her not guilty. The courtroom erupted. The afflicted girls screamed in outrage. The judges pressured the jury. They reconsidered. The verdict was changed. Guilty. Rebecca was hanged on July 19. She prayed as the rope was placed around her neck. Her last words were forgiveness. By the end of the summer, 19 people had been executed. 14 women, 5 men, 1 man, Giles Corey, refused to plead. For this, he was pressed to death with heavy stones. More weight was added until his chest collapsed. His final words were more weight. Even animals were not spared. 2 dogs were executed after being accused of witchcraft. The madness knew no limits. And still, Tituba remained alive. She stayed in prison, questioned repeatedly. She continued to speak when asked. She continued to confirm the court's beliefs. She knew silence would kill her. Yet something strange was happening. The accusations began to creep upward. They touched respected families, relatives of judges, wives of ministers. The fear began to turn inward. Doubt whispered quietly for the first time. Then the governor's own wife was accused. That was the moment everything changed. Suddenly, spectral evidence seemed less reliable. Suddenly, the girls' visions were questioned. By October, the court was dissolved. Executions stopped. The damage was done. Lives were gone. Families ruined. Salem would never recover. Tituba was eventually released from prison after someone paid her jail fees. Who paid them is unknown. What happened to her afterward is a mystery. She vanished from the records. The woman who opened the gates of hell disappeared into silence. In the next part, the trials will end. But the lies will not. Part 6 will reveal how Salem tried to erase its guilt. And why Tituba was never allowed to speak again. Part 6. The silence that followed the screams. When the killing finally stopped, Salem did not feel relief. It felt shame. The gallows stood empty. The prisons slowly unlocked. The screams faded. But something worse took their place. Silence. In October of 1692, Governor William Phipps ended the court of oyer and termine. No announcement was made to the grieving families. No apology was offered. The executions simply stopped, as if the terror could be undone by pretending it had never happened. It could not. 19 people were dead. 1 more had been crushed to death. Dozens more had rotted in prison cells for months. Children had watched parents taken away. Property had been seized. Reputations destroyed. Salem had crossed a line that could not be erased. The governor ordered a new court to review remaining cases. This time, spectral evidence was no longer allowed. Without visions and screaming fits, most cases collapsed. The accused were released. But freedom did not mean forgiveness. Those who walked out of prison returned to empty homes. Farms ruined. Livestock gone. Neighbors who would not meet their eyes. Survival came at a terrible cost. The afflicted girls stopped screaming almost immediately. As soon as the court ended, the fits vanished. No more convulsions. No more visions. No more demons. The timing was impossible to ignore. Some villagers began to whisper. Others refused to listen. Reverend Paris was one of the first to feel the backlash. His sermons no longer comforted. They reminded people of blood. Of graves on Gallows Hill. Members of the congregation demanded answers. Why had he allowed spectral evidence? Why had he pressured the girls? Why had he encouraged the hysteria? Paris defended himself. He said he had fought Satan. Others said he had fed him. By 1697, the village forced Paris out. His ministry ended in disgrace. He left Salem quietly, bitter and angry, carrying the weight of what he had helped unleash. The judges felt the pressure too. Some expressed regret. Judge Samuel Sewell stood in church and publicly confessed his guilt. He asked God to forgive him for the innocent blood he had helped spill. Others never apologized. They blamed the devil. They blamed the girls. They blamed God. Anyone but themselves. The colony declared a day of fasting and prayer to atone for the trials. It was symbolic. No families were restored. No lives returned. Years later, the Massachusetts government offered small financial compensation to surviving victims and families of the executed. Money for lost parents, coins for stolen lives. It was never enough. And then there was Tituba. She remained in prison long after the trials ended. Not because she was guilty. Because she was forgotten. Prisoners were required to pay their jail fees before release. Food, chains, guards, every day added to the cost. Tituba had no money. Reverend Paris refused to pay for her. He claimed he was no longer responsible for her. The man who had owned her would not even buy her freedom. She sat in her cell for months. Alone. In early 1693, someone paid her fees. We do not know who. The records do not say. It might have been a stranger. A merchant, a farmer, or someone who saw value in owning a woman whose name had become infamous. Tituba was sold. That is the last official record of her life. No destination, no new owner, no trace. She vanished. Some historians believe she was sold into slavery elsewhere in New England. Others think she was taken back to the Caribbean. A few suggest she died soon after, worn down by prison and winter. The truth is buried, and that silence is not accidental. Tituba knew too much. She knew how the girls practiced divination. She knew how the panic began. She knew how the court guided her confession. She knew how survival required cooperation. Her voice was dangerous. Better that she disappear. The girls who accused survived. Some married well. Some lived long lives. A few later expressed regret. Others never spoke of Salem again. Ann Putnam made a public apology years later, claiming she had been deceived by Satan. It was a convenient explanation. Mercy Lewis never apologized. Abigail Williams left Salem shortly after the trials. She vanished almost as completely as Tituba. No one knows what became of her. Perhaps Salem wanted it that way. The village tried to move on. New houses were built. Fields were planted again. Children were born. But the memory lingered. Salem became a warning whispered through generations. What fear can do. What happens when belief replaces evidence. What power looks like when it wears the mask of righteousness. And at the center of it all remains a single name written once in rust-colored ink. Tituba. She did not die on the gallows. She did not walk free. She slipped into history's shadows. But the story does not end here. Because the question remains. Why was Tituba allowed to live when others were not? Why were parts of her confession erased? Why did powerful families work so hard to control the narrative? In the next part, we will examine what those missing pages may have contained. And why the truth about Salem is far more unsettling than witchcraft. Part 7 will expose the secrets buried beneath the trials. And the reasons they stayed buried for centuries. Part 7. The pages that were never meant to be read. History tells us the Salem Witch Trials ended in 1692. That is not true. What ended was the noise. The fear. The executions. The screaming in courtrooms. What did not end was the lie. For more than 200 years, historians repeated the same story. That the records of Tituba's full confession were incomplete. That pages had been lost to time. That fire, decay, or carelessness had erased them. But records do not disappear by accident. They are removed. After the trials ended, Salem's leaders faced a new problem. They had survived the panic, but the memory of it threatened their future. Merchants feared business would suffer. Ministers feared faith would crumble. Judges feared history would judge them. So they reshaped the story. Official transcripts were copied and recopied. Certain details were shortened. Others were softened. Some were removed entirely. Especially those involving Tituba. Early drafts of court summaries mention that her confession was long and detailed. Far longer than what survives today. Witnesses described hours of testimony. Yet the version preserved is strangely brief. Too clean. Too convenient. Why? Because Tituba did not just talk about witches. She talked about people. She described meetings not only with spirits, but with neighbors. She spoke of influence, of instruction, of how fear was guided. Those parts were dangerous. In Puritan society, witchcraft was not just a crime. It was proof of spiritual failure. To admit that respected families had encouraged hysteria would destroy the moral foundation of the colony. So those words vanished. One historian in the early 19th century noted something odd while reviewing Salem documents. References were made to testimony that no longer existed. Pages numbered in court indexes did not match surviving records. The explanation given was damage. The truth was control. The powerful families of Salem had learned a lesson. Fear could be useful, but memory was dangerous. Tituba's confession had served its purpose. It validated the trials. It justified the executions. It confirmed sermons preached for years. After that, her voice was no longer needed. Or wanted. What might she have said? We cannot know for certain. But patterns tell stories. During her confession, Tituba repeatedly described being threatened. She said she was beaten. She said she was told to speak. She said she feared punishment if she remained silent. These details appear briefly, then vanish. Why include them at all? Because they were spoken too publicly to erase completely. Other details survive only in fragments. She described being told who to accuse. She described seeing fear used deliberately to control others. These statements appear in secondary accounts but not in the official transcript. Someone made a choice to preserve the myth. Another clue lies in who benefited. The Putnam family emerged from the trials stronger than before. Land disputes disappeared. Rivals were gone or silenced. Their influence grew. Reverend Paris fell, but the ideology he spread remained. The judges retained their power. The colony avoided accountability, and the blame settled comfortably on superstition and children. Tituba became the symbol of evil. Foreign, enslaved, other, a perfect villain. By turning her into a caricature, Salem avoided looking inward. Modern scholars sometimes ask why Tituba confessed so fully. Why she described such dramatic scenes. Flying, talking animals, devil books. The answer is survival. She gave the court exactly what it expected. Puritan fear shaped her story. But within that fear, she may have hidden truths. Truths that powerful men did not want repeated. There is also the question of why she was never tried. Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne were processed quickly. Tituba was not. She remained in prison without trial for more than a year. This was unusual. Some historians argue it was neglect. Others believe it was deliberate. As long as she remained untried, she remained unheard. A trial would mean testimony. Questions. Answers. Better to let her fade. Even her release was quiet. No public notice. No return to Salem Village. No follow-up. She disappeared into slavery again. And with her went the most dangerous story of all. The story that Salem was not possessed. It was manipulated. Fear was not spontaneous. It was encouraged. The girls did not invent everything. They were guided. Not always consciously. Not always maliciously. But guided. Adults asked leading questions. Ministers framed their visions. Judges rewarded certain answers. Tituba understood this system instinctively. She lived under power every day. She knew when to speak and how. That knowledge kept her alive. But it also made her inconvenient. So Salem erased her. In later generations, Salem tried to cleanse its reputation. The trials became a lesson about superstition. Not about power. Not about race. Not about fear used as control. Tituba remained a footnote. A name without a face. A voice without words. Yet she is the key to understanding everything. She stood at the center of the storm. She saw how stories were shaped. She survived by adapting. And then she vanished. The missing pages matter because they remind us of an uncomfortable truth. History is not just what happened. It is what is allowed to be remembered. In the next part, we will explore how Salem transformed its trauma into myth. How the witch trials became folklore. And how that transformation ensured the real lessons were never fully learned. Part 8 will reveal how Salem turned horror into legend. And why the truth is still unsettling today. Part 8. When horror became a legend. Long after the last execution, Salem found a way to survive. It did not do so by telling the truth. It survived by turning terror into a story. By the early 1700s, the people of Salem were tired of guilt. They were tired of whispers. They were tired of being known as the town that killed its own. So they changed the meaning of what had happened. Instead of calling it injustice, they called it hysteria. Instead of calling it murder, they called it misunderstanding. Instead of calling it cruelty, they called it superstition. This shift was subtle, but powerful. When something becomes a legend, it loses its sharp edges. It becomes distant, safe, something to discuss rather than confront. Salem began to rewrite itself. The gallows were removed, graves were left unmarked, the exact location of executions was allowed to fade into uncertainty. Even the names of the dead were rarely spoken aloud. Children grew up hearing vague warnings about the dangers of fear. They did not hear about neighbors turning on neighbors. They did not hear about judges who refused doubt. They did not hear about prisons filled with innocent people. Silence became tradition. By the 19th century, Salem was no longer just a place. It was a symbol. Writers arrived, poets, historians. They were fascinated by the drama, not the suffering. They focused on witches instead of widows. They romanticized the trials as strange and mysterious, rather than brutal and calculated. The victims became characters. The accusers became curiosities. The real horror faded into atmosphere. Nathaniel Hawthorne was born in Salem in 1804. His ancestor had been one of the judges in the trials. Hawthorne felt the weight of that legacy his entire life. In his writing, guilt and hidden sin appear again and again. He understood that Salem was haunted, not by ghosts, but by conscience. Yet even his work softened the truth. The witch trials became moral allegory, not accountability. As the years passed, Salem learned something important. People would pay to be frightened. By the early 20th century, tourists began to arrive. They wanted stories. They wanted symbols. They wanted witches. So Salem gave them witches. Shops sold charms and brooms. Costumes appeared. Halloween celebrations grew larger each year. The town that once executed people for witchcraft now sold witch hats. It was ironic, and deeply uncomfortable. The real victims disappeared completely in this transformation. Sarah Good was no longer a starving woman accused because she begged. She became a spooky name. Rebecca Nurse was no longer a respected elderly woman condemned by lies. She became a footnote. Tituba became something even worse. She became fantasy. Her race was exaggerated. Her beliefs were distorted. Her role was simplified until she no longer resembled a real person at all. She became the exotic witch who started it all. That version was easier to sell. The truth was harder. The truth required admitting that Salem did not lose control. It exercised it. By blaming superstition, Salem avoided examining power. The judges were not foolish men. They were educated. They were respected. They made choices. Ministers were not ignorant. They were trained. They framed fear as faith. The trials were not chaos. They were organized. Turning the story into legend erased responsibility. Even the phrase Salem Witch Trials does this quietly. It centers witches, not victims, not courts, not executions. Words matter. By the late 20th century, Salem fully embraced its new identity. Museums opened. Tours promised haunted streets and dark magic. Visitors laughed where prisoners once prayed. Cameras flashed where chains once clinked. Very few places spoke about the prisons. The hunger. The sickness. The months of waiting for death. Very few mentioned that none of the executed were proven witches. Legend is comfortable. Truth is not. Yet something strange happened as Salem leaned into myth. People began asking questions again. Scholars dug deeper. Descendants spoke out. New memorials were proposed. In 1992, 300 years after the trials, Salem finally held a formal memorial ceremony. Names were read aloud. Stones were placed. It was a step, but even then, the story remained incomplete. Tituba was barely mentioned. Her disappearance was still convenient. Legends prefer clear endings. Real history does not provide them. Today, Salem exists in two forms. One is colorful, playful, full of costumes and candles. The other is quiet, heavy, and buried beneath the streets. That second Salem is harder to see. It exists in court records, in prison accounts, in letters filled with regret. It exists in the missing pages. It exists in the silence around Tituba. Legends ask us to be entertained. History asks us to be honest. And honesty is frightening, because it forces us to admit that Salem is not unique. That fear still spreads. That authority still misuses belief. that outsiders are still blamed first. The witch trials are not a warning about magic. They are a warning about people. In the next part, we will return to the beginning one last time. We will look at the small choices that built the disaster. The moments when Salem could have stopped. And why it did not. Part 9 will uncover the point of no return. The moment fear became unstoppable. And the lesson we still struggle to learn today. Part 9. The moment Salem could not turn back. Every disaster has a moment when it could still be stopped. Salem had many. But there was one moment when fear finally won. And after that, nothing could save them. It happened quietly. Not with screams or executions. Not with gallows or ropes. It happened inside a courtroom. By the spring of 1692, Salem was no longer a village in crisis. It was a village addicted to accusation. The jails were full. The accusations were growing. The afflicted girls were treated like sacred instruments of truth. What they said was no longer questioned. If they screamed, someone was guilty. If they pointed, someone was arrested. If they collapsed, someone was condemned. The judges were under pressure. The colony leaders demanded answers. The people demanded safety. Fear had become law. To handle the growing number of cases, a special court was created. It was called the Court of Oyer and Termine. It was given extraordinary power. This court made one decision that changed everything. It allowed spectral evidence. Spectral evidence meant this. If someone claimed they saw your spirit harming them, even if your body was somewhere else, it could be used against you. No proof was required. No witness needed to see you physically. If the girls said your ghost attacked them, that was enough. This was the point of no return. Once spectral evidence was accepted, innocence no longer mattered. Anyone could be accused. Anyone could be condemned. The court filled with respected names. Rebecca Nurse, John Proctor, George Burroughs. People known for their faith. People known for their honesty. People who had lived quietly and honorably. When Rebecca Nurse was accused, many in the courtroom wept. They could not believe it. She was elderly, gentle, devout, yet the girls screamed when she entered the room. They collapsed. They claimed her spirit was twisting their bodies. The judges hesitated. For a brief moment, reason flickered. A jury initially found Rebecca Nurse not guilty. The courtroom erupted. The afflicted girls screamed louder. They writhed on the floor. They cried that Rebecca was attacking them even now. The judges panicked. They sent the jury back. Moments later, the verdict was changed. Guilty. That was the moment Salem broke. If Rebecca Nurse could be condemned, anyone could. The message was clear. Character did not matter. Truth did not matter. Only fear mattered. Confessions became the only way to survive. Those who confessed were spared execution. Those who maintained innocence were killed. This twisted the system completely. Liars lived. Honest people died. People began confessing to impossible crimes. They claimed to fly, to sign the devil's book, to meet Satan in the woods. Some named others to save themselves. Each confession created new accusations. The web spread. John Proctor tried to stop it. He spoke out against the girls. He called them liars. That sealed his fate. He was accused. During his trial, he confessed to adultery in a desperate attempt to discredit the main accuser. It did not save him. The court saw only one thing. Another enemy of God. George Burroughs was accused next. He was a former minister. At his execution, something happened that shook the crowd. He recited the Lord's Prayer perfectly. It was believed witches could not do this. The crowd hesitated. Some began to doubt, but the execution went on anyway. Reason had lost its voice. By summer, 19 people had been hanged. One man was pressed to death with stones because he refused to enter a plea. Even children were accused, even respected church members. No one was safe. And still the accusations continued. Salem was eating itself. Behind closed doors, doubt finally began to grow. Some ministers spoke out quietly. They questioned spectral evidence. They warned that Satan could deceive. Increase Mather, a powerful minister, wrote that it was better for 10 witches to escape than for one innocent person to die. But the court did not listen. The machine was moving too fast. Then something unexpected happened. The accusations reached too high. The wife of the governor was named. That changed everything. Suddenly, skepticism was allowed. Spectral evidence was questioned. Executions were halted. The court was dissolved. Just like that, the nightmare ended. Not because Salem realized the truth, but because the wrong people were threatened. The prisoners were released slowly. Some returned home broken. Some never recovered. Families were ruined. Land was stolen. Trust was destroyed. The village was left with silence. No one wanted to talk about what they had done. Apologies came years later. Too late. Compensation was offered. Too small. Salem had crossed a line it could never uncross. The real horror was not the executions. It was the realization that the system worked exactly as designed. Fear was rewarded. Power was protected. Truth was disposable. Salem did not fall because of witches. It fell because it chose fear over doubt. Obedience over reason. Safety over justice. This is why the trials still matter. Because the moment Salem passed the point of no return is a moment every society faces. When accusations replace evidence. When emotion replaces truth. When silence feels safer than speaking. In the final part, we will confront the lasting lesson of Salem. Not the legend, not the costumes, but the warning it left behind. Part 10 will close the story. And ask the hardest question of all. Could it happen again? Part 10. The lesson Salem left behind. The story of Salem does not end with the last execution. It does not end when the gallows are removed. It ends with a question that still haunts us today. What would you do if fear ruled your community? If whispers could destroy lives? If the people you trusted were the first to turn against you? Salem teaches us that horror is not always in monsters. Sometimes it lives in the hearts of ordinary people. By the time the courts were dissolved and the last prisoners released, Salem was a town haunted. Not by spirits, not by curses, but by guilt, by memory, by the knowledge that they had participated in something terrible and could not undo it. Tituba had vanished from the public record. What became of her remains unknown. Some say she was sold to another household. Others believe she escaped into the shadows, carrying with her the secrets she had learned and the knowledge that she had survived when so many others did not. Her story, her courage, and her wisdom were buried under layers of legend, misrepresentation, and fear. She became both villain and victim in the imagination of the village, her real life swallowed by myth. The families who lost loved ones tried to rebuild. Graves were marked, apologies were made, but the scars ran deeper than any marker could show. Trust was shattered. Faith was shaken. The belief that the godly were always safe and just was forever broken. The people of Salem had learned a lesson that was hard to carry. Fear can be more contagious than fire. Power can twist justice into cruelty. Innocence offers no protection when suspicion is law. Yet in this darkness, there is a spark. Because even as history was hidden, even as stories were sanitized, the truth survived. In letters, in court records, in whispered recollections passed down through generations, the real story of Salem remained. The story of ordinary people who acted out of fear, of children manipulated by adults, of women like Tituba caught between worlds, powerless and brave. Salem is not just history. It is a mirror. It shows us what can happen when fear replaces reason, when suspicion replaces evidence, when gossip replaces truth. It reminds us that accusations can become weapons, that hysteria can become law, and that injustice thrives when no one questions it. Today, we tell the story differently. We remember the victims. We honor the innocent. We examine the past honestly. And yet, the lessons are not just for history. They are for now, for communities everywhere. For every time fear threatens to silence reason. Because the truth is simple. People are capable of both great cruelty and great courage. And which path we take depends on choices we make in the moments we have. Salem may have fallen into fear, but we can rise above it. We can speak even when voices tremble. We can defend the innocent even when it is hard. We can recognize the warnings of hysteria before it spreads too far. That is the legacy of Salem. Not the gallows, not the witchcraft, but the reminder that fear is powerful, and courage is stronger. That stories matter, that memory matters, that justice matters. So as we close this story, remember the names of those who were silenced. Remember the lives cut short. Remember the truth hidden behind legend. And carry the lesson with you. Fear is contagious, but so is courage. If you have enjoyed uncovering the darkest secrets of Salem, and exploring the truth behind history, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a story that challenges what you thought you knew. Share this video with friends who love history, mystery, and the chilling truths hidden in our past. Leave a comment below telling us which part of Salem's story shocked you the most.